Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope that you have been enjoying your spring break. Um, so with this video, we're going to start talking about Nietzsche's On the Advantage and Disadvantage of History for Life. Long title. So, this is a fairly early work by Nietzsche, 1874. It's part of a collection of writings, untimely meditations, and we'll sort of talk about what it means for something to be untimely. Um, you will notice with this work um, some some very similar themes and ideas of what we have been reading thus far, and you'll like Emerson, you'll start to see a little bit more criticism, perhaps, but maybe further than Emerson, you're going to start to see even like further separation from what's going on with the precursors to Nietzsche, with what's going on intellectually and philosophically in Europe and Germany. Um, you know, I originally I was going to ask you to read Emerson's essay History, which I think would be really informative for this piece, as well as some of his some of Emerson's work, Representative Men, because the idea of the great man, sort of the great historical personage, which again we see in other writings. I think would be informative here because Emerson clearly is someone who has a very important, perhaps profound influence on Nietzsche. Nietzsche's doing his own thing, right? It's his own voice, but especially in these early writings, there's a very discernible, or maybe more discernible influence of Emerson, in part on his thinking. So if you're feeling like just doing some additional perusing, you can check out Emerson's work, Uses of Great Men. It's real short, sort of prefatory chapter for his work, Representative Men. And I think that conceptually there's a lot going on that's similar here with Nietzsche. Nietzsche's and also Emerson's history essay. Um, this is one of those works where the title, as much of a mouthful as it is, which it's also been translated on the uses and abuses of history. But it really kind of tells us what's going on here. Is that he's thinking about history, but he's going to be thinking about history, put simplistically, in positive and negative terms. He's going to be making the case that there is a way of doing history, and it's the way that has become, popular, or the default way, perhaps, of doing history, in modernity, in the 19th century, and to this day. Like you're going to probably catch some things going on here um, that that go on in the text that are still going on today in terms of how people think about history or conceive of themselves or events, what went on in the past. And thinking about those in similar ways that Nietzsche is putting here and being critical of, right? Because he's offering an alternative. There's a way of doing history that is disadvantageous for us, and then there is a way of doing history that is advantageous for us. And again, note the active voice. He wants to get away from, he's being very critical of a sort of static sense of history, that it's just like stuff happened, and we have this science, this human science of history, historiography, of reading and researching, and a sort of methodological approach that kind of just goes and gives an account of everything that happened, and just we're done. And this, he believes, is not helpful for us. Number one, it's not true. And number two, that is not something that we are able to sort of harness for our own lives, um, for the health of a culture, for the health of our self culture and the health of the culture in which we live. And so he's going to sort of critique critique that previous methodological approach, sensibility, attitude, um, sense of like assumptions about what history is doing, and he's going to sort of be offering also um, an alternative, a preference. And this is you know, we might call it a sort of existential approach to history. That's not quite accurate, both because Nietzsche isn't really an existentialist, um, and also maybe technically that's not the best description. But I think once you get the idea that he's talking about the importance of human existence, of subjective experience, of feelings and moods as they relate to the task, as they color the task, that then you can see why describing as a sort of existential approach, um, that why that might be at least, whether or not it's appropriate, it would at least be like a helpful um, way of describing it. Um, and there's also the idea, and I kind of put this in how I was listing it thematically in the syllabus, because we're reading Emerson and Nietzsche in this sort of section these weeks. The idea being that Emerson, who is also an individualist primarily, yet you get the sense that he is pretty concerned with the betterment in a sort of democratic sense, in a pluralistic sense, if you will, of everyone. Nietzsche, that is not a sentiment that really carries over to Nietzsche, and that Nietzsche is much more about not just in the way that he approaches history, but his philosophy much more generally. It's about the people that are basically able to carry forward the project on their own, to do philosophy, to to do history, to create new theories and new interpretations, to create art, to live dangerously. Like these are rare things, and they're not something that everyone in society is going to be able to do. And I believe, while there's some of that in Emerson, I think that it really starts to pull away in Nietzsche, and so Nietzsche has much more of a reputation for it in some senses. And I could I could probably talk a little bit more about that, but I'll just end in saying that I'll re-emphasize Emerson is also an individualist. Um, he is also someone that's interested in self-culture, but it's an activity that, I mean, Emerson's not naive. He realizes we come from different places. There's sort of we're sort of born with whatever set of potentialities we have, whatever particular talents we have. Like we're all not the same. We're not all capable of the same things, but there is a sort of greatness that each in our own way can sort of attempt, that we can accomplish. If we sort of undertake the task. Anybody can rehabilitate their instincts. Anybody can want to live authentically and achieve greatness in as much as it is given to them to be great, right? And the criteria becomes, it becomes relative. It becomes relative to what talent. Being a great farmer, being a great academic, being a great politician, being a great whatever. And I think that with Nietzsche, there's not as much forgiveness or diplomacy when it comes to that. That he's really talking about certain types of cultural activities. In early Nietzsche, this is extended to the possibilities of the state, of war makers. If you've read the Greek State and Homer's Contest with Nietzsche, then you know that he's much more sort of he's thinking about war making and conflict as perhaps being the supreme art and justification of the state. And that's something that as Nietzsche goes along, I think he loses his optimism about that, and it's not so much about the state. It's much more still about the self and about sort of culture much more generally. And culture, I think that's big, sort of culture, society that's understanding itself outside of, those unhealthy nationalistic tendencies. It's much more, I think, cosmopolitan. In any case, saying all that, let's go ahead and take a look at, we're going to look at the preface, and we're going to look at entry number 1. I plan on sort of going through the first 3, maybe 4 entries on the advantage and disadvantage of History for Life, and then kind of just hitting some passages through the remainder, and then maybe kind of pausing once again at maybe entry number 10, the last one. In any case, we're doing the Hackett edition. It's a nice thin little volume that I love these little volumes for multiple reasons. They're inexpensive. Hackett does a great job for students. Usually good translations, affordable prices, and also when they take these smaller works, it's not as daunting. Just to be completely honest, you feel like you can kind of really pick it up and read it and make progress, and it's not some thick tome. Although Hackett does publish thick tomes. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the preface. So it starts on page 7 of this text. It begins, "Moreover," is a quote, "moreover, I hate everything which merely instructs me without increasing or directly quickening my activity. These are Goethe's words, with which, as with a boldly expressed certum censeo, we may begin our consideration of the worth and worthlessness of history." So he starts with this quote by Goethe, the famous poet, author, playwright, intellectual. And it's kind of, like the title's giving a lot away there. The opening line of the preface gives a lot away. He says, "Moreover, I hate everything which merely instructs me without increasing or directly quickening my activity." This is the somewhat romantic notion that I need to be moved, right? And you see lines similarly, in Emerson, and anybody that's sort of influenced by the Romantics, or the Romantic as it comes through German idealism. And that is, it's, like content is one thing, if we even want to use the distinction of content and form, which Nietzsche is going to problematize. But the idea is that like whatever it is you're saying is one thing, right? It could be like good information, but like wow me, move me, make me sad, make me angry, make me passionate. Like that's more important, because it gets me active. It gets me, sort of productively responding. Whereas if it's just information, ask yourself this, like, you've taken classes, you've done, work in whatever area you've done work in before. Like, it's a beatdown. Like, it doesn't seem particularly to speak to the human experience to say, here's some just, data, here's just some info, and here it is, like, process it, take it in, be a biological computer and just like crunch the numbers, right? That we want narratives, we want provocation, we want murder, intrigue, and sex, we want like offense, we want bold proclamations, we want that kind of stuff, right? It's why Nietzsche is going to, in part, make lots of references to art, to dancing, to music. Think about how music moves you. Think, if you're someone who dances, like it's not about the information. That there's some other sort of human experience going on there. There's a reason why you feel compelled move in a particular way under certain sort of set of conditions, and what what the music should be doing and all that. And so history is more art than science. It should definitely have good information, but it's not really about the information if it's going to be of use to us. All right. Let's see. He says, our aim will be to show why instruction which fails to quicken activity, why knowledge which enfeebles activity, why history as a costly intellectual excess and luxury must, in the spirit of Goethe's words, be seriously hated. Like, don't just give me the info. Don't just write some massive monograph, some textbook with just like, okay, this happened, and then this happened, and so did this, and then this happened. He hates it, right? It should be hated. That when that becomes history, that history is just, a million volumes of the stuff that happened, and that's basically just what it is, then this is to be despised. It's not of use to us. And it does, what will happen under those conditions is it does what it basically does now, right? It's a library filled with books that nobody goes and reads, right? It's the internet which has compiled all information, but it's basically just information. And so nobody nobody reads all those free novels. nobody's like, reading that medieval history of, the horse, like of the stirrup or something like that. The history of the plow, or, whatever it is. Like none of that is really moving and driving us. It's just excessive. It's a surfeit of histories. He says, certainly we need history, right? But our need for history is quite different from that of the spoiled idler in the garden of knowledge. Even if he in his refinement looks down on our rude and graceless requirements and needs, that is, we require history for life and action, right? That's what we need it for. Not for the smug avoiding of life and action, or even to whitewash a selfish life and cowardly bad acts. Oh, yeah, I want to talk about that. He says, only so far as history serves life, we will serve it, but there is a degree of doing history and an estimation of it which brings with a withering and degenerating of life, a phenomenon which is now as necessary as it may be painful to bring to consciousness through some remarkable symptoms of the age. And he goes on to, use terms like feeling, tortured, revenge, which again, it's sort of part of the lexicon of terminology to do a history for life. Here he says, it requires, the history that we need is the one that requires us to act, to do something, to feel something. And not the smug avoiding of life and action. This is the type of history that gets you thinking, that gets you moving, that gets you curious, makes you wondering why things are the way they are about any particular phenomenon or event or institution or person. Like you might experience it from time to time whenever you get really curious about your band, and you're really curious, like, how that band got together, and what their life was like growing up, and what caused them to write the kind of music that they write, or your favorite author, that like you get sort of biographically, historically interested, something like that. On the other hand, you've got this idea of a type of history that is something that causes us to be static, that causes us not to be active, that causes us not to be curious. It's like, oh, well, it's just information out there. And if I ever want to know about, 19th century whaling practices, or, if I ever want to know about this particular, indigenous group of people, or if I ever want to know about this historic phenomenon, whatever it is, like, it's out there and I'll just look at it when I need to. On one sense, okay, fine, but in the other, like if that is how the history has been written, if it has just become information out there, and it's just sort of objective, and it's not really something that speaks to me and my life experience, or my disposition is not one in which I am inclined to go and get it and to be moved and provoked by it, that therein lies the problem. Okay. Let's see. Let's go ahead. Go to page 8 and let's look at the last few lines of the preface. He says, I should not hide this is the middle of that last paragraph of the preface. He says, I should not hide the exonerating circumstance that I have for the most part taken the experiences which those painful feelings occasioned in me form myself and have considered those of others only for the sake of comparison, and that further, only so far as I am the nursling of more ancient times, especially the Greek, could I come to have such untimely experiences about myself as a child of the present age. So, I mean, when he says nursling of more ancient times, especially the Greeks, Nietzsche is getting at the idea of the untimeliness, that this untimely meditation that he's going to perform on the use and disadvantage of history for life, that this is highly informed by something that comes from an alien age, that comes from a time that, like, we think that we know it because we have a somewhat unhealthy relationship to history, and we're like, oh, the Greeks were just people that lived a long time ago, and their culture, like, is A, B, C, D. Like, okay, now we know who the Greeks are. Like, and let's go to the Romans, and let's go to the Chinese, and let's go da 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 da. We go down the list. That these are not particularly, like, they're not particularly true in terms of just how strange and just how alien ancient people were compared to us that exist today, and that also that the retrieval of them as a sort of foil, as a sort of a possibly critical lens by which to view our own times is something that makes it also untimely. The things that you're going to be saying, some of it's going to sound really strange because it's so different from our assumptions. It's so different from how we think things work. The idea that we would do history, that history isn't just stuff that happened, but that you do it. You do it, right? Not just the historian, but like everybody, in a sense, performs their historicity, either through, even in their inactivity, even in their, cynical or apathetic attitude towards it, and then those that are actually acting historically. So to finish that up, he says, for I do not know what meaning classical philology, and that's what Nietzsche primarily was, as a classical philologist, studied the language and the cultures of the Greeks and of the Romans. He says, I don't know what meaning classical philology would have for our age if not to have an untimely effect within it, that is, to act against the age, and so have an effect on the age to the advantage it is to be hoped of a coming age. Something like Nietzsche wants what he's doing to be of advantage to the individual now, to the people now, but also to what's ahead. There's a certain sense of history that is timely, and that is, I think, the way that Nietzsche's going to put this is he's going to talk about, like, wisdom, which, okay, everybody wants to be wise, or something being timely. Like, yeah, like, we want something timely, and he's problematizing the sort of usual conception of those terms, and he's going to be countering with a sort of untimeliness, sort of unhistorical sense, with an unwisdom, that these are the sort of corrections to what's going on today, is that he finds that's unhelpful and unhealthy. And so, we have to understand the untimeliness as being acting against or setting itself against the present age, inasmuch as he has come to the determination that there are unhealthy views, unhealthy beliefs, unhealthy, cultural, societal practices that can be addressed, And one of the ways that we can do that is we can go back and we can read the Greeks. We can go back and we can read the Romans, right? And it's not for the way that we usually are told, like, oh, well, whoever forgets the past is doomed to repeat it. Like that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a subjective, an owned interpretation, a biased interpretation, that is going there to find what's alien and strange, but also healthy, strong, passionate, provocative. And we're bringing that into sort of the present age as a critical lens, by which to see what's going on, and to do differently now, to see differently, to act differently, to create differently. Yeah, so that's what's going on. I had intended to also jump into section 1, but I ended up talking a little bit longer about the preface than I intended to. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and pause here, and I'll come back pretty quick and jump into 1, and yeah, maybe into 2, but I'll mainly going to cover section 1 in the next video. Anyways, until then, keep reading,